and welcome to this week's virtual drop-in. This week we have a session from Duncan Carty, and it's a really different and cool session. But just before we get started, I just wanted to plug Duncan's illustration page, which you can follow and commission and do all sorts with, and it will either be in the comments of this video or the description. Don't forget that you can support these virtual drop-ins if you want to see more of them. No worries if not. And all you need for this session is a paper, and some sort of drawing implements. Duncan will explain. I hope you enjoy the session.
Thanks, Emily. So to warm up, we're going to start with a technique called automatic drawing. All you need is a piece of paper and a pencil, and we're just going to let that pencil move randomly across the page. This technique was developed by the Surrealists as a means of expressing the subconscious, although it was also used by mediums who believed that the pencil was being moved by spirits. In reality, we're just accepting and following the little urges that our minds are giving us. When we are creating, the brain makes predictions called action schema that anticipate the results of a certain action. The purpose of this exercise is to create the least amount of resistance possible and act on those urges immediately to the point where they may appear to be external, whether that be our subconscious, ghosts, muses, the CIA, whatever. In a way, we are simply observing the process and acting as a bridge between our creativity and our craft. There is no wrong way to do this. You are literally drawing what you feel. In the end, all drawings is a long series of decisions, and all decisions are fundamentally emotional because no amount of logic can make you make a decision unless you feel like it. Feel the strokes. They should be happening spontaneously. Don't try to control them, because if you try to control spontaneity, you destroy it. Some of you may struggle with automatic drawing because it is so freeform, in which case I suggest a second technique, the mandala, which means circle in Sanskrit. They are geometric and usually symmetrical, but how the patterns manifest is entirely up to you. They have been used throughout history as an aid to meditation and spiritual practices. Warming up for drawing is not that physical, maybe a bit of a stretch, but it's more about getting familiar with our materials and getting into the right mindset. We stretch our muscles at the beginning of improv sessions, but think about what we do to get into the right attitude. I suggested this drop-in because I know many people are self-conscious of their drawing skill, but let me tell you, belief is far more important than talent. What I found curious about this exercise was this newfound structure made me anxious, because there was suddenly a way I could be wrong. We all have different strengths, and there's no such thing as a weakness, only a strength in an incorrect context. Now, you may say, Duncan, this is just doodling, and you are correct, but I want to use that to highlight the power of names. A term like surrealist automism is far more intimidating than doodling, and as a result you may feel like a fraud. We all have imposter syndrome to an extent. I feel more comfortable being called an illustrator than an artist, just as many people feel more comfortable being called an improviser than an actor, but that's what we are. The artist Ben Shan said, I believe if it were left to artists to choose their own labels, most would choose none, and I find this idea quite comforting. There is no point in which you suddenly qualify. Art isn't something you do, it's something you are. The flip side of this is that if you aren't creating anything, there's no expiry date. You may have stopped, but you haven't quit. Your value as an artist and as a person isn't measured by your productivity. A musician must maintain and protect their bodies from strain just as an athlete must. If your creative endeavors are causing you physical or mental harm, it's time to stop and reevaluate your priorities. You are more important than your art. The next set of exercises will be about using different types of initiation in the same way that we ask for a suggestion at the beginning of a scene. The first one I'm going to call blob characters because I couldn't find any other name for it. We are going to start by making a blob of paint on our page, and once it's dry, we're going to draw over it to create a character. Artists have their own version of performance anxiety called fear of the blank canvas. A blank canvas can be intimidating because we're so terrified of ruining the masterpiece inside our head that we don't know how to start, but somehow we must. Something that David Escobedo said that helped me no end with this anticipation was that initiations aren't that important. It's the support and building upon it that makes a scene. The same philosophy applies here. A stray bulge of paint may be an ear or a nose. The colour may suggest their personality. You may see an expression in the texture of the paint. All of these can be the seed from which your character grows. Anything can be an offer if you choose to support it. We have this notion that creative genius is about things springing forth fully formed, but more often than not, it's about building and iterating upon an idea. Malcolm Gladwell did a really good episode on this for his podcast Revisionist History called Hallelujah that I thoroughly recommend. Now, I realise that not everyone will have paint in their house, so the second exercise uses the same principle but using a scribble as the initiation instead. Make a scribble on the page and then embellish what you can see in it. If you can't see anything, well, there's no time limit, and there's nothing stopping you from trying again. I suggest not holding back. I really want you to go ham, because a small restrained scribble will only make this exercise harder. In life drawing, we do something called a gesture drawing, which I will go into a bit more detail about later, but basically it's about getting the gist of a pose. It's at the gestural stage that a drawing has its most energy, and each refinement takes a little bit of that away. The same applies for improv. A big offer will give you more to work with, and injects a level of energy that is hard to recreate later on. When we are anxious, we're worried that we'll end up saying the wrong thing, but can get so inside our heads that instead of saying the wrong thing, we may end up saying nothing at all, and you can't build upon nothing. Anxiety is when the problem is thinking there's a problem. A big offer will never be wasted because both your partner and yourself will support it. In any creative endeavour, you are in a collaboration with yourself. In this exercise, which I will call Stuffed Jigsaw, I'd like you to pick a category that contains many different objects. Start drawing them in random positions, then fill in the gaps as neatly as possible with more objects. The more objects you draw, the more their shape will be governed by their neighbours. I picked fruit and veg, only to realise that most of them are round. This shows that towards the end of a project, we are actually making very few creative decisions, because our past selves have already made those decisions for us. We are simply fulfilling the motions, and this is usually the point where most people get bored and move on to the next thing. If you are hesitant to make these initial decisions, you may try to plan ahead, practice endlessly, or search for the perfect reference picture. But all of this is procrastination, because you will never truly find out the result until you do it. We don't procrastinate because we're afraid of work. Think of how much work you put into playing a game, reading a book, or binging a TV series. We procrastinate because we don't trust our future self to support our present self. But ask yourself, am I being that supportive future self to my past self? You are only in control of your present, so consider whether your future self will be thankful for the choices their past self made. Trust yourself. You will know what you need to know when you need to know what you need to know. Right, you are now ready for some advanced techniques. This one is called colouring in. Really? Yes, because sometimes the only barrier to art is time, and simply requires patience. It takes time to create a high quantity of art, it takes time to create a high quality art. It's not surprising that adult colouring books have become so popular. Colouring is low in challenge and requires little skill, and the balance of both results in flow state, a state of sustained concentration where the hours fly by. Buddhist monks will make mandalas out of coloured sand, 5 feet wide, and can take weeks or even months to complete. Patience is both faith in your abilities, but also faith in the process. Not to call them out, but you often see this with stand-ups who are new to improv. They know themselves to be funny, which they are, but no one is laughing, so they get impatient and drop in a joke. It's always awkward and it's always obvious. They are trying to control spontaneity. Think of it as having a piece of fruit now or waiting for a fruit tree to grow. I think most people can come up with a funny idea. However, if you set up a funny situation, the funny ideas will create themselves. This next exercise is very similar to one we do in improv. We're going to do the same study several times. However, the first one will be 10 minutes long, the second 5 minutes, then 2 minutes, 1 minute, and finally 30 seconds. The subject doesn't really matter. The purpose of this exercise is to show what is essential to a drawing or a scene. In gesture drawing, we try and find the line of action that suggests the largest action or motion throughout the pose. You'll notice, regardless of how long I have, each of these has a clear C shape, going from the legs, along the back, and through the arms. Growing up, I would spend countless hours trying to draw perfect lines, only to realize that they were in the wrong place. World-class artists will revisit their artistic fundamentals like anatomy or lighting often, just as world-class improvisers must brush up on their basics. You will never move beyond them. It doesn't matter if you're doing a 1-minute scene or a half-hour long form. Respect your fundamentals. This also shows the effect time can have. The 10-minute study was relatively relaxing compared to the 30-second one, so thinking about our creativity on a different timescale can change our perspective. Every scene, every drawing is a step on our creative journey, and people can get impatient because they can't jump miles. Aristotle said, "We are what we do repeatedly." Excellence is not an act, it's a habit. I used to go to life drawing every week and draw about 15 poses per session. Over a year, that's over 750. It's not what you're willing to put up with, it's what you're willing to turn up for. And doing something regularly is enough because it all builds up. Art is a marathon, not a sprint. There's a story of a Chinese emperor who wanted a painting of a rooster, and the artist said it would take him up to 3 years. When the emperor came to collect his painting, the artist got up and painted it in 3 minutes. The emperor was furious. "You asked for 3 years when you could paint it in 3 minutes?" But the artist showed him his house, full of failed rooster paintings, and he said no. It took me 3 years to paint it in 3 minutes. Your next scene will not be your magnum opus, but it will be a step towards it. Remember, a mistake is also a step forward, and in the context of your grander creative journey, one misstep amongst millions. Your mistakes will only appear larger if your journey is short. The privilege of drawing is that you can see exactly how far you've come. The problem with the creative journey, however, is that progress is rarely linear. When we learn something new, our skills are trying to catch up with our tastes, and when our skills surpass them, we'll get bored and seek out something new. We are constantly fluctuating between the pain of growth and the pain of stagnation. In this way, the creative journey naturally propels itself forward. Have patience and have faith in the creative process. I recommend a short film called The Gap by Ira Glass that sums this up quite well. This section only has one exercise, but comes in 2 halves. The first half is to do a study, this time for 20 minutes. This time limit is important, and I suggest you try and stick to it as closely as possible. I'll go over the second half once I'm finished. Here's a question. What motivates you? I have always wanted to draw. However, I have also struggled with it for a very long time. Recently, I realised the point at which it became difficult was during my GCSEs and A-levels, because my motivations had to move from internal to external. As a child, I would draw for the sake of it, but now I have to draw for a grade. The same happened when freelancing. It was no longer a hobby. It had to be good, or I wouldn't make any money. Although I went to university to do the sensible option, it did not fulfill me. Something has always called me back to creativity. I was always told not to become an artist because there's no money in it, but I have never been motivated by money. The moral is, never listen to advice based in fear. If a similar thing happened to you, then watch the TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson called Do Schools Kill Creativity? It's deeply gratifying and quite entertaining. This goal-orientated mindset I'm going to refer to as utilitarianism. Although usually referring to ethics, the philosophy of means justifies the ends is the same. We often value the results instead of the act. Where utilitarianism struggles is when value is in conflict with values. What you consider valuable in your work will change the way you approach it. Every time you begin a scene or a drawing, you accept the risk that it may not work. If your thinking is utilitarian, you will only see it as a waste of time or materials. If you only think of your work in terms of its results, you are making your happiness dependent on factors outside of your control. It makes us say what an art form should be, and that makes us inflexible. If your measure of success is a singular vision, then there are a million ways to fail. Why do you keep putting yourself in situations where failure is a default? We treat struggling as if it were failing, but struggle is good. It means you're growing. We can be so in love with where we're going that we ignore where we actually are. Creativity is an organic process. Dictating how it should be is like saying a tree grew the wrong way. Even though no tree is alike, they are all recognizably trees. I say, be a good parent to your creative children and love them for what they are. Whatever you value in your art form, I can guarantee that there is someone out there successfully doing the opposite. Is a good illustration complicated? Look at the work of Tom Gauld. Is good illustration neat? Look at Quentin Blake. Take minimalism, for example. People get incredibly angry about it because they value skill as a requirement to good art. They say things like, my 6-year-old could do that. However, that may be the point of minimalism, to remove the artist entirely. The painting, Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow and Blue 3, by the artist Barnett Newman, was a large canvas mostly painted red. In 1986, a man entered the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam and slashed it with a knife, wishing to take revenge on abstract art. When they came to restore it, however, they found it incredibly difficult to match the colour because Newman had used his own paint recipe. So you see, there was skill involved, just not one that people could appreciate. People assume that you have to like art, but if minimalism makes you angry, is it not valuable in confronting why? The worst thing art can do is inspire apathy. If you only value laughter in improv, you won't value dramatic scenes, even though the audience will be rapt. If you dislike a person's style, they're not wrong. You just value different things. Now, I don't blame you for having a utilitarian mindset. We live in a capitalistic society, so utilitarian ideals are constantly being reinforced. Viola Spolin said in Improvisation for Theatre, categorized as good or bad from birth, a good baby does not cry too much. We become so enmeshed with the tenuous threads of approval and disapproval that we are creatively paralyzed. However, approval always invokes disapproval, because in order to succeed we must overcome failure, and so its spectre looms. I feel that social media has given us an underlying feeling that we need to perform, and that's why there's so much anxiety these days. People worry so much that they're not living that they actually forget to live, and the truth is that you don't have to post anything online if you don't want to. This is why community is so important. No one should be treated differently based on their performance. We are all part of the artistic community. You are automatically accepted and we all support and encourage each other no end. I'm not saying that commodifying your work is a bad thing. If it's your career, it's necessary. However, I do feel that this is a separate action from creation itself and needs to be treated as such. You can't judge your art while you're making it. Evaluate your work afterwards. A drawing is an artifact of process, not a performance. There is the practice of art, and then there is a piece of art. Just as you can perform improv, but if no one's around, is it a performance? With improv, it's easier to consider that the product is the process. The impermanence of improv is its privilege. You did a good performance, it's gone. You did a bad performance, it's gone. We lack that privilege with a drawing. When the Buddhist monks finally finish their months-long sand mandalas, they will meditate over them, and then wipe them away. This is the second half of this exercise. Just as we cannot keep the pencil strokes that made it, we are not allowed to keep the final picture itself either. The point of the drawing isn't the drawing, it's to be drawn. This is unpleasant, but it is also necessary. The ancient Greek Stoics used the example that if you have a favourite mug, and that mug breaks and you are upset, then you didn't really love the mug for what it was, you loved it for what it could do. So, if even I admit that that was unpleasant, what's the benefit of being non-utilitarian? Well, when we do something for its own sake, it becomes play. Art is subjective, so trying to create objectively good art is like trying to play a game of tag. Art is enjoyable because we have a fundamental joy in being the cause. Brian Sutton Smith said, "The opposite of play isn't work, it's depression." Fun is often treated as the byproduct to being productive, but being productive can just as easily be the byproduct of fun. Experimentation is the essence of creativity because you can learn just as much from a failed experiment as you can from a successful one. Question the assumptions that are given in your art form. Can I create a drawing with only one line or only straight lines? If anything, the lockdown has enforced its own constraints. What is improv like when there isn't a stage or improvisers can't be in the same room? Adding new stipulations and constraints open up new challenges, and in improv this is the basis of short form. The word game can trivialize its value, but they are actually exercises that train different muscles. The fact that they are fun is a strength, not a weakness. Here you can see me playing a game called The Quiet Year with individuals who wish to be credited as the sexy ones. We tell the story of a community rebuilding itself after a conflict, and every event is represented on the map. The map is incomprehensible to anyone who wasn't playing the game, but the point of the game wasn't to produce the map. The map was a consequence of playing. Fundamentally, all art is about the same thing: communication. There are plenty of drawing-based games out there, and I encourage you to seek them out, whether it's a board game like Pictionary or online like Drawful and Civic Doodle in the Jackbox series. I would like to play a game of telephone with you all now. If you make your way to the Miss Imp Facebook page and comment on this video, I will send you a drawing for you to redraw. Then you will send your drawing to the next person who replied to your message for them to redraw, and so on. Remember, even if you play, there is no obligation to share your picture publicly. So, that's the end of the drop-in. Hopefully you found it helpful, and I encourage you to think about how other art forms relate to your improv and vice versa. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I did making it. For those of you who drew along in real time, go put your wrists in some ice water. Thank you Emily and Miss Imp for allowing me to do this, and thank you for joining me. Bye!